Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert, and today we're taking a deep dive into the stories that are shaping politics here at home, if you're in the United States, and abroad. From the bold progressive surge in New York with Zohran Mamdani to California's Proposition 50 and the fight over who gets to draw the lines that decide elections, all the way across the Atlantic to the Netherlands, where the country is set to elect its first openly gay prime minister. We'll also look at historic wins here in the US with governors like Mikie Sherrill in New Jersey and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, showing that progressive, inclusive leadership isn't just surviving, but it's winning. This episode is about power, representation, and a clear, very fucking clear cultural shift away from fear-driven politics and towards leaders who govern with inclusion, competence, and respect. Isn't that nice? But before we get into it, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Visit my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to check out all of my fun merch. And you can also send your listener stories, topic suggestions, or guest suggestions there on the contact page. Wherever you're listening, leave a pod review, share the episode, subscribe, like it, all the fun things that help me reach more ears around the world. And while you do that, I'm going to wait in awkward silence until you either rate or share or do something. So I'm just going to be here hanging out, waiting. I wish I could really sit here in awkward silence, but we've got things to talk about. So let's hit it. We are starting things off with one of the most talked about and divisive figures shaking up New York politics. You know his name, Zohran Mamdani. He's being called a visionary, a radical, a disruptor, even a communist. Depending on who you ask, he's either the fresh start that New York desperately needs or the biggest risk the city has ever taken. And as he positions himself for a historic run at City Hall, and today he won, the drama surrounding him is as fierce as the ideals that fuel him. So let's take a journey and start at the beginning, because it's important to know where these people came from that are now our leaders. Zohran Mamdani was born in Kampala, Uganda in 1991. I am older than him. How sad for me. He was born to Indian parents and moved to New York City when he was just 7 years old. He went to public school, graduated from the Bronx High School of Science, and later studied Africana Studies at Bowdoin College in Maine. And you know me, probably pronouncing that wrong. Should look it up before. But before politics, he worked as a housing counselor, helping families on the verge of eviction. And he was deeply involved in local organizing. He became a U.S. citizen in 2018, and just 2 years later, he pulled off what many thought was impossible: unseating a 5-term incumbent in the Democratic primary for the New York State Assembly. That's when people first started paying attention. From the start, Mamdani's story stood out. He's the son of immigrants, a Muslim New Yorker with roots that stretch across 3 continents, and someone who built his campaign from the ground up. He branded himself as a people's candidate, not polished, not corporate, but deeply connected to the struggles of everyday New Yorkers. His campaign speeches didn't sound like they came from a consultant's focus group. They came from the subway, from the bodega, from rent-burdened tenants who had had enough. And let's face it, most of us have had enough and are hoping for leadership that can relate with us, not billionaires. Mamdani's politics are proudly progressive. He's described himself as a democratic socialist and made affordability his central theme. Something, again, I think we can all get behind. Housing, transportation, childcare, and groceries need to be more affordable, So why wouldn't we vote for him? He's argued that the city has been sold off to the highest bidder while working families are crushed by costs. His campaign promises include rent freezes for stabilized units, city-run grocery stores to reduce food prices, free bus service, and universal early childhood care. In his words, New York should be a city for the many, not the millionaires. And there's countries around the world that offer, well, free healthcare, but also free public transportation. I don't know why that's not a thing here. His grassroots energy and bold ideas made him a rising star on the left, but also a lightning rod for controversy. His critics, especially from the business and political establishment, have called him naive, reckless, and dangerously idealistic. They say his plans are financially unsustainable, that his vision of city-run services and higher taxes on the wealthy would drive businesses and jobs away. Editorials have accused him of being anti-police or anti-business, and some conservative outlets have gone even further, painting him as a symbol of the so-called radical takeover of the Democratic Party, which I find absolutely hysterical. Who's radical? Who's being radical lately? Who's really overturning the government and breaking down the West Wing, the East Wing, and also coming for everybody's rights? Talk about radical. But the controversy has not only come from the right, even within his own party, moderates are a bit nervous. Veteran Democrats, former mayors, and big donors quietly worry that Mamdani represents a shift that is too far left, that his idealism could alienate middle-class voters or jeopardize the city's fragile budget. They see him as an experiment the city cannot afford. But I'm also sure that they said that about people that were anti-slavery or were for equal rights. It's far too radical until one day it no longer is. But then there's the issue that's ignited the loudest backlash: immigration. Mamdani has been one of the fiercest critics of ICE and federal immigration enforcement. He's called ICE a fascist agency, condemned raids that tear families apart, and vowed to strengthen New York's status as a sanctuary city. That stance has earned him passionate support from immigrant communities, but also fierce opposition from law and order advocates and conservative politicians who claim that he is undermining public safety. And I'm sure there is a middle ground there somewhere. My last episode, we talked about living in the gray, so it doesn't have to really be one end of the spectrum or the other. Now, adding to the tension are past statements he made about policing, particularly during the 2020 protests when he called the NYPD a major threat to public safety. His opponents have never let him forget it. They argue that his anti-police rhetoric makes him unfit to lead a city where crime and safety remain top concerns. Mamdani, for his part, says he's not anti-police, he's anti-abuse of power, and insists that he's focused on building trust, accountability, and safety that works for everyone. Again, to me, that makes total sense. There is such a wild abuse of power that we have seen since long before COVID, but it really ramped up in 2020 in the police systems everywhere. Otherwise, people wouldn't have been in the streets saying defund the police. We want people to be treated fairly and justly. And of course, in today's political climate, no progressive figure rises to prominence without attracting the attention of, who, not Voldemort, but Donald Trump. And Trump has not held back, as why would we expect him to? Following Mamdani's primary victory, Trump lashed out on Truth Social, calling him a 100% communist lunatic. He's mocked his intelligence, his voice, his background, writing that Mamdani looks terrible and isn't very smart. Then came something even more alarming. Trump warned that if Mamdani ever became mayor and refused to cooperate with ICE, he would defend New York by ordering federal authorities to arrest Mamdani. He suggested withholding federal funds from the city if Mamdani didn't behave, in his words, and some of Trump's allies have gone as far as to question Mamdani's citizenship, pushing for investigations into his naturalization. Baseless, of course, but politically explosive nonetheless. And he's not running for president, right? You can't be president unless you were born here. So let him just take the gig. Now, when I wrote this, I said, if Mamdani wins, but he did fucking win, so congratulations. New York could find itself at the center of a constitutional shutdown. The city relies heavily on federal funding for everything from housing and transportation to security and disaster relief. A Mamdani administration that refuses to collaborate with federal immigration enforcement would almost certainly provoke retaliation. The federal government could withhold funds, sue the city, or even attempt to remove local protections for undocumented immigrants. Mamdani has made it clear that he will not back down, saying New York must protect its residents regardless of their immigration status. The question is, what happens when that defiance meets federal power head on? And it appears this might be something we'll be seeing with our own eyes, finding out what happens pretty soon in the near future. So the stakes are enormous. Supporters see Mamdani as a new kind of leader, one who actually believes government can serve people instead of corporations. And wouldn't that be dope as fuck? To them, he's proof that politics doesn't have to be cynical, that the next generation can reclaim democracy from billionaires and lobbyists. We want real, grounded people working for us and with us. His critics, though, see a disaster waiting to happen. They warn that his utopian policies will bankrupt the city, destroy its business climate, and turn New York into what one opponent called a social experiment with 8 million unwilling participants. And I would say a lot of them are pretty willing since he won. He could be voted out, right? It's not like he's coming in here. He's not a king. We don't have kings here. Hello, Donald Trump. If you don't like what he's doing, you don't have to vote for him next time. I don't think things are going to shift that much. Beyond the economics and the headlines, the Mamdani movement represents something bigger, a struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party. Is it still the party of Wall Street and city developers, or is it returning to its working class roots? Can a young democratic socialist born in Africa, raised in Queens, and powered by small donations actually win and govern the biggest city in America? Yes. Again, the answer is fucking yes, because he won. And that says a lot. And now we wonder, can he survive the political warfare that will surely follow? Because make no mistake, the battle will not end just on election day because he's won. With Trump's promise to defend New York, that could set off an unprecedented clash between a progressive city government and a hostile federal administration. The mayor of New York could become both a local leader and a national symbol, standing up to federal power, risking arrest, or being made an example of. It's the kind of political drama that could completely define a generation, and quite frankly, I think it's going to. So Mamdani is many things: an immigrant, a New Yorker, a progressive, a lightning rod. Why am I getting emotional right now? Get it together. He's loved and loathed in equal measure. And whether you think he's the future or a warning, there's no denying that he's changing the conversation, because when someone like Mamdani rises to power, it forces everyone to ask uncomfortable questions about power, about privilege, about who the city really belongs to. So this week we watched as that story was unfolding, how a kid from Queens with a degree and a big dream became the most disruptive mayor in New York City's history and the second youngest mayor of the city. And how far the establishment or the federal government might go to stop him is still a question that will be on my mind and the mind of many others. And I think it's really important to note that New York City has a huge LGBTQ plus community. It's like one of the biggest in the country, if not the biggest in the country. And Mamdani was nothing but supportive to trans people, to gay people, to bi, to non-binary, to lesbians, all the things in between, everything on that beautiful rainbow spectrum. He showed his support. He stood up for us. And that's what we want in leadership. That doesn't mean he hates every Republican that lives in the city or denounces people that maybe don't agree with the LGBTQ plus way of life or being. I'm trying to use my words wisely here, but he's leading with acceptance and he's leading with love. And perhaps people are tired of politicians leading with hate. So maybe some Republicans could take a note from Mamdani's book. And now we're going to turn our attention to a story that may sound technical, and it's definitely map heavy. It's also bureaucratic, but it's actually central to how democracy in America gets shaped. We're talking about California's Proposition 50. It has officially passed, and what it does is redraw the lines of power quite literally. I'm going to walk you through how we got here, why it matters, how it works day to day, and what it will mean for future elections. Something that I've been wondering about ever since I heard about Texas redrawing their maps and, well, rigging elections. So let's start with how exactly we got here. We're going to begin with the backdrop. So in Texas, the Republican controlled state government recently redrew its own congressional maps mid decade, not just after a census, in a way that is widely described as a partisan effort to tilt upcoming elections in their favor, aka rigging elections. California Democrats viewed that move as an aggressive power play, rightfully so. Texas is redrawing to claim more safe Republican seats to influence the U.S. House of Representatives ahead of the 2026 midterms. So, seeing that, California's Democratic leadership said if Texas can, well, we can too. If Texas can reposition itself for partisan advantage, then we have to respond. Enter Prop 50. The measure, placed on the 2025 ballot, asked Californians, would you allow the state legislature, rather than the independent commission, to adopt new congressional district maps now, taking effect for the next 3 election cycles in reaction to what happened in Texas? The official summary explains that a yes vote means the state would use new legislatively drawn maps starting in 2026 and continue until after the 2030 census. California's long-standing process had been that the independent California Citizens Redistricting Commission draws congressional maps after each census in order to limit partisan gerrymandering. But Prop 50 temporarily sets that aside. It says for the next 3 elections, 2026, 2028, and 2030, the legislature draws them. Then after the 2030 census, it goes back to the commission. Putting this into plain language, imagine a sports league. I mean, who wants to do that? But let's imagine it, where the referees are independent and draw the play field lines every few years. Then one side says, wait, our rival just changed the field mid-season to favor themselves. So we'll take over the referee's job for the next 3 games to level the playing field. That's basically what California is doing. Does that make any sense? Because I definitely did not use ChatGPT to make a comparison. But yeah, it's like the referees redrawing the lines on the field, or like, making up their own fucking rules so that they can win. And this is taking back control and be like, no. We're going to even the playing field here. I should have come up with a much better metaphor / analogy / way of explaining that, but you get it because you're smart. So anywho, Prop 50 officially passed. Voters approved it by wide margins. I believe it was 8 in 10 voted yes on Prop 50. It now authorizes new maps that are expected to favor Democrats in Congress by giving them better odds in certain seats. And I've been asking myself, how is this really going to work in like everyday terms? Like, what are the logistics here? So to understand what Prop 50 does logistically, we're going to need to break it down step by step and do it really plainly. Let's keep this simple. So first, what is a map in this context? We know what a map is, but in this context, for the U.S. House of Representatives, every state has a number of districts, each electing 1 representative. How the lines are drawn determines which voters are in which district. If you live in a district that leans strongly to one party, your representative is almost predetermined. If drawn differently, the balance can shift. And second, who draws the lines matters. If an independent group draws them based on neutral criteria like compactness and communities of interest and equal population, then you're likely to get more genuine competition. But If a party draws them intentionally to create safe districts for themselves or to pack or crack the other party's voters, that's gerrymandering, manipulating maps for partisan gain. And many argue this undermines fair representation. Third, what Proposition 50 changes. Under Prop 50, the California legislature, which is under Democratic control, gets to draw the congressional map for the next 3 cycles instead of the independent commission. They've already drawn the map and submitted it as part of the measure. The map is slated to apply in the 2026, 2028, and 2030 elections, as I mentioned. And after that, following the 2030 US Census, the independent commission will take over again. And maybe by then, we'll all be a little bit more fucking calm. And until then, I'm going to remain pissed. Fourth, what needs to change administratively, because many districts will shift boundaries. Some voters may find they are now in a different district with a different representative or candidate field. Counties and the state elections office will have to update voting materials. According to the Legislative Analysis Office, the costs are pretty modest, one-time costs to counties of a few $1,000,000 statewide and about $200,000 to the state. Fifth, how this affects you as a voter. If you live in California, you may see on your ballot in 2026 a different slate of candidates because your district number or boundaries have changed. The person representing your area might also change. Also, because the map is drawn to favor one party, the competitive balance of your race may shift. If you live in what used to be a swing district, you might find it will now tilt more safely to the Democrats or whichever party drew the lines. Now, since Prop 50 has passed, the implications are pretty immediate and stretch forward into the next decade. What does it look like now? First, the map is set for the next 3 congressional elections. That means the 2026 U.S. House elections in California will be fought under the newly drawn districts because those districts are drawn by the Democratic-controlled legislature. Political analysts expect as many as 5 congressional seats currently held by Republicans to flip to Democrats under this new map. That gives Democrats a significant advantage nationally. Since California is the largest state, flipping 5 seats helps their goal of controlling the U.S. House. The measure was explicitly sold as a response to what Texas did. So this is a counter move in the nationwide game of redistricting. And it's going to be tit for tat. I feel like everyone's just going to start doing it now. Will we get anywhere? Who the fuck knows? For voters, this means in 2026, when you go to vote for U.S. House representative, the candidate slate and district may look different from what you had in 2024. Some incumbents will face new boundaries, some challengers may emerge, and parties will be adjusting their strategies. Because the map is locked in for at least 3 cycles, parties and candidates will begin maneuvering now, like ASAP if they haven't already. Incumbents will evaluate whether they want to run in the new district boundaries or opt for another. Voter outreach is going to shift. Neighborhoods now in different districts will be newly targeted. Campaign money will follow the maps. Under Prop 50, because the lines favor Democrats, we should expect more Democratic-leaning races and fewer toss-ups in some districts. At the same time, there's likely to be legal and political pushback. Critics call this measure a power grab, saying it undermines the principle of independent, nonpartisan redistricting and hands map-drawing power back to politicians who are in office. Lawsuits have been filed, and even the state Supreme Court declined to block the measure from going to ballot. It also changes how national parties view California. Historically, California has been a Democratic stronghold, but with maps that were more neutrally drawn. Now, the Democratic Party is actively re-engineering those districts to increase their margin of safety. That shifts resources, strategy, and attention. Republicans, conversely, will face steeper uphill battles in California's congressional races and may shift resources elsewhere and hopefully move out of the state. No, don't do that. We need all varieties of humans here. I'm just kidding. Nobody come for me. So here is why it matters. On one level, This is about maps and feathering districts. But on a deeper level, it is about power. Who gets to make the rules and how the voices of voters are translated into representation. When one party succeeds in redrawing maps that favor them, and they don't go about it the correct or technically legal way, elections matter less for those districts. Outcomes become more predictable, and that can erode competition, which in turn can reduce accountability. And then it feels like we can't even do anything about it. So the only way to fight back is to kind of meet them on their own level, right, Texas? So for California, a state with deep diversity and a massive population, there's more people in California than there is the country of Canada that I grew up in. This matter is magnified. The representation that your community sends to Washington may now be chosen by a map designed for partisan advantage rather than competitive swing. And for the country, this changes the balance of the U.S. House of Representatives. Flipping 5 seats in California shifts the national picture. Furthermore, Prop 50 signals a kind of arms race in redistricting. Texas moves to advantage Republicans. California moves to advantage Democrats. That dynamic could play out and is playing out in several other states, changing how elections are contested, how districts are drawn, and how voters are even representative. Like I said, tit for tat, other states have already done it for Republicans. California is the first to do it for Democrats. So where does this leave us? Where does it leave us? What happens now? With Prop 50 passed, California has made a very bold choice to bend the rules of map drawing temporarily in order to defend or advance partisan power. Whether you see this as a necessary defensive move or a dangerous precedent depends on your view of what fairness in elections truly means. Because were we just supposed to sit by and let Texas do it and just be like, well, can't do nothing about it, I'll just sit here with my hands in my lap? Or was this the right choice in retaliating? And coming up in 2026, you'll go to the polls under these new district lines. Candidates will campaign differently. Some races may be less competitive, if not competitive at all. And maybe not competitive at all. The parties will shift their strategies. And for the next several years, the map's locked. After the 2030 census, the Independent Commission will regain control, but until then, the legislature rules the lines. And for everyday voters, people that care, people that are ready, make sure you check your district before you vote. Understand if your boundaries have changed. Be aware that the person running to represent you might now be somewhere new in a totally different district, or your community might have been shifted into a different district. And as always, know your candidates, know their positions, and what representation means for you. And we're going to keep going. I mean, in my opinion, that was good news. So we're going to keep going with good news. We love good news today. We're keeping this a exciting and relatively positive episode. I know I don't probably sound very exciting. I'm so fucking tired from my New Orleans Halloween weekend. It is, what day is it today? Wednesday. I got back on Monday morning. I didn't even party on Sunday. I am exhausted. I am not caught up on, I guess, rest. I don't know, but these are all good things that I am excited about. Okay. So we're going to celebrate a trio of big wins. More signs that in many places, fairness, inclusion, competence, and civility are on the rise. Because when queer-friendly, progressive-minded candidates win in places that matter, it sends a message not just about policy, but about culture, identity, and the future of our society. Let's begin with Europe. In the Netherlands, after a fierce election, Rob Jetten, just 38, leader of the centrist Liberal Party Democrats 66, otherwise known as D66, is set to become the country's youngest prime minister and its first openly gay prime minister. And I just got full body chills. And why am I getting emotional again? Maybe there's a really big come down after my New Orleans trip. Oh, fuck. Maybe that's the problem. But it's really exciting. That's so exciting for the queer community, for the people that voted for him, just to have someone in power that we can look to and be like, finally, a fucking gay man is running some shit. It's about goddamn time. His campaign wasn't about lip service to LGBTQ plus issues, though they mattered. It wasn't just about that. It was about optimism, inclusivity, and governing for everyone. He defeated the far-right party for freedom, also known as PVV, whose leader Gert Wilders, I think, has been dubbed the Dutch Trump for his populist anti-immigration rhetoric. And for queer people everywhere, as I said, this is huge. Someone like them openly at the highest level of government. And for the broader politics, it's a rebuke of populist, identity-fueled fear politics. And some might think, oh, it's part of the gay agenda. But somebody like him will govern for all because he knows what it's like to be left out and not thought about and be an afterthought and to be running against someone who essentially is a different version of Trump. Us gays know what it's like to feel left out and like nobody cares. So if anybody is made to run a country or be in any position of power where you need to represent everyone and anyone, it's someone from the LGBTQ plus community, because we will do that. Now, we're going to shift back to the US. In 2 important states, progressive, pro-equality, reject the extreme type campaigns just won big. In Virginia, Abigail Spanberger has been elected governor. She ran a pragmatic campaign focusing on cost, safety, economic opportunity, not just identity politics, though identity mattered. Her win is a sign that voters are done with absolute chaos. We're done with it. We're done with culture wars. We're done with the us versus them politics of the far right and the far left. Let's not leave the far left out. In New Jersey, Mikie Sherrill has been elected governor, defeating a Republican opponent aligned with Trump's politics. Another big win that should be celebrated. The fact that she was endorsed by the Human Rights Campaign for governor in New Jersey underscores that equality and LGBTQ plus friendly politics are now part of mainstream winning strategy. So what do all of these wins mean, right? I'm not just shitting out my mouth. I'm not just shitting. Oh my God, should I delete that? I'm not just shitting out my mouth. That's not what I meant to say. I'm not just bullshitting and just talking for no reason is what I meant to say. There's a reason I'm talking about this stuff. And today I felt like this was the beginning of a very big shift. These are not isolated, obviously. They reflect a broader shift away from MAGA style politics, the kind of politics that's grounded in grievance, identity baiting, exclusion, and fear. Instead, we're seeing voters respond to competence, inclusion, and decency, kindness, caring, people who seem to actually give a fuck. Queer representation isn't just symbolic anymore, it's material. When someone openly gay leads a European country, when governors are elected with pro-equality endorsements, like endorsements from the Human Rights Campaign, that changes the conversation. It changes who gets to lead, who is represented, and whose voice counts. On the policy side, these wins open space for big change, better protections for the LGBTQ plus people, better attention to civil rights, more inclusive governance for all. On the electoral side, this sends a message to Republicans and to the very far right that their type of politics are no longer working everywhere. Voters are saying, yes, you can believe in liberty, but you can't build it on division and fear and demolishing the whole fucking government. For Democrats and progressives, these wins show that you don't need to give up on majorities by chasing extremes. You can win big by just being inclusive and by focusing on everyday issues and respecting identity. And those everyday issues are issues that we all can relate upon, whether you're Democrat or Republican or the far end of either spectrum. Now, culturally, this is my favorite part, this is a denial of the hate-driven politics of MAGA. Bye-bye. It says, diversity is not our weakness. It's what makes us strong. It's what has built this whole entire country, and representation matters. And leadership looks like the people who weren't welcome before. When the first openly gay prime minister of the Netherlands is elected, when states with large queer populations elect governors supported by pro-equality organizations, it normalizes inclusion. It chips away at stigma It shifts the center of where politics is. Instead of hostility to immigrants and to queer people, to minorities, we see affirmation. Instead of worrying about which side you're on, voters are asking, was the candidate decent? Did they deliver? Did they respect people? And I don't want to give Trump any credit here, but because he's been such a fucking shithead and spoke so poorly to people, I think people are tired of that. They want someone that they can look up to. So now people aren't thinking, are you Democrat or Republican? People are voting based, which I think is how you should vote, based on someone's decorum and also their politics and beliefs and what they stand for. But a lot of it has to do with how they treat people. And what this means for our country, if you're here in the US, moving forward is very hopeful. First, 2026 midterms are now less scary for progressives. These wins create momentum. The blueprint is working. Win in the suburbs, win with working class voters, win by talking about real issues, not just culture wars. And second, the far right, which has staked so much on identity grievance and exclusion, is struggling to convert that into victories. When voters are more concerned about their rent, their kids' futures, their community's safety, and they don't see the far right offering answers, they're going to shift. And the far right hasn't offered answers for just about fucking anything. Third, representation changes what is possible. When queer, immigrant, and female leaders win, it sends a message that you belong, we all belong. That changes who's going to run in the future. It changes who's going to vote, and it changes who's leading. And over time, that's going to change policy, politics, and culture. And I just got chills again. We have an immigrant as the mayor. We have these two female governors that were backed by the HRC and a gay prime minister. Why is this all just hitting me right now? Maybe I'm waking up. Maybe this is the dopamine hit that I needed to rise back up after my Halloween come down. So now what do we need to watch? What do we need to pay attention to? Well, keep an eye on how Sherrill and Spanberger govern. Do they deliver? Do they show inclusive leadership in action? Does the new prime minister, Jetten, does his government in the Netherlands follow through on inclusive, competent policy rather than it being just a symbol? Because if yes, then this is more than a moment. It's a movement. On the flip side, watch how the far right reacts. Do they double down on culture war or do they pivot on policy? And watch whether the inclusion wins model becomes a standard for winning campaigns. Not just identity, but competence and respect. And if they don't, because it wouldn't be the first time politicians flip their script, if they don't, pay attention to that as well and find someone next time to vote for that will stay consistent. These wins matter because they tell us a new story about power in 2025. Not the story of fear, division, and exclusion, but one of inclusion and dignity and competence and respect. For queer people, for immigrants, for women, for all people previously seen as outsiders, this is the fucking proof. Your story can matter, your voice can lead, and when that happens, the rules of politics change. And that's it for today's episode of Hot Air. From Zohran Mamdani's groundbreaking rise in New York, to California's Prop 50 reshaping congressional politics, to Rob Jetten making history in the Netherlands, and the wins of Sherrill and Spanberger here at home, the message is pretty clear. Voters are rejecting division. Plain and simple. We just want to hang and pay our rent and be able to take trips and eat some fucking food. And I think we'd like a little bit more respect. These wins are not just headlines. They're signs of a broader cultural and political shift. One that could redefine what leadership looks like for years and decades and generations to come. So thank you for joining me on this episode. And as always, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, in politics, the air is always heating up and change is on the rise. And I will see you next Tuesday.